This naturally leads to the next FAQ. Do I need to understand I Ching in order to read Augury accurately? Well, my short answer is yes, but let me provide some background before I elaborate this further. Throughout Chinese history, a significant fraction of the I Ching scholar only study the underlying wisdom of I Ching and ignore the augury function completely. This was because I Ching itself has high inherent knowledge and wisdom value even without any augury application. Confucius famously said, and it was well documented in history, that if I do everything I Ching taught me to do, why do I even need augury? So I myself was in that camp before as well. I studied I Ching purely for its wisdom value and despised augury as some sort of superstition. But after I digested all the I Ching hexagram and lines, I found I Ching augury to be pretty accurate and pretty useful in my life. And I believe many of you study I Ching for the same sort of motivation because of its augury function. So if it adds value to our life, why ignoring it? So that's also another motivational background for me to produce this series of videos as well as all the related information and software. I Ching augury generates an answer to a question being asked by you or whoever was asking the question in form of a hexagram and changing lines. And as mentioned earlier, these sets of hexagram and changing lines can form a depiction of a particular scenario in a static and dynamic manner. If you do not know what those hexagram and the lines really mean, to how does it impact subject's feeling, mental state, as well as circumstances, if you couldn't digest all that meaning effectively, you could not put together a complete picture which will allow you to interpret the augury result in a very meaningful way. Naturally, the next FAQ is what is the basis for the I Ching augury? Okay, this is a controversial part of I Ching. The accuracy and the usefulness of I Ching augury challenges our current understanding of how reality works. But do we really have a complete picture of how reality works? For example, as of today, no scientist can explain what time really is as an independent physical phenomenon. Einstein called quantum mechanics experiment results spooky in his later years, and quantum mechanics two-slit experiments results and the symmetry experiment result still cannot be fully explained today. So we should not be too confident of our view of the reality and should really keep an open mind. Well, to make sense of why the augury works, I researched and formulated a set of postulates that's yet to be proven. So I welcome your discussion and input on why you think the I Ching augury works as well as it does. However, this is all these postulates are subject to further debate and investigation, and I won't spend too much time here. So I would leave the charts as it is here, and for you to pause and read it if you're interested. And otherwise, I'm gonna move on. The previous FAQ involved a bunch of postulates. This FAQ will try to respond in a currently acceptable scientific way. The question is, what are the probability of number of changing line in the three-coin toss method? Now, why was this question being asked? The background is there are many ways to perform I Ching augury. The three-coin toss method was just one of the very popular method. If you don't know what that is, you can Google it, and most of the I Ching websites online, I Ching tool has this particular casting function. It's mostly easily understood and that could be practiced. Basically, you have the three coins, and depending on the face or tail side of a combination of the coins, you can develop the response hexagram and the changing line and so forth. I call this probability distribution on this table as the standard random distribution of a three-coin casting method. As you see, I use a Monte Carlo simulation to depict a pure random casting with no meaning involved. As you can see that statistically, one change line is the most common outcome of the pure statistical from this pure statistical model. If you do I Ching Augury and reading enough times, you will realize actually your casting statistic to your response is very similar to such a distribution. In other words, I Ching Augury does not violate our belief of physical world in some fundamental way. But if augury does involve some divine intervention, it really should violate our current mathematical understanding of this randomness by showing a significantly different type of distribution. So, is it our belief that's influencing our reality, or the reality is really an objective, independent, divine occurrence, independent of the human mind? So the interesting point being brought out by this FAQ is that for other methods which are having different changing line distribution statistic, are they superior or inferior in the augury application? Well, if you study the review from many sources, you will realize there's no one method that's far superior than the other. Well, if the statistical distribution does not matter and the distribution is purely random and follows the mathematical derivation, what does that say about the probability of our reality that's being formed? I brought out this particular FAQ basically is to prompt us to have an open mind, because to show that our current understanding even of our own current reality may not be a complete picture. So as we study I Ching and its augury application, we should keep an open mind. And as long as practically is helping us to make a better life, a more righteous life, hey, let's use it. Okay, the next FAQ is why does I Ching augury reading seems ambiguous and they require interpretations? Well, while we have infinite variations of life experiences, I Ching texts and hexagrams are limited. As we attempt to describe life statically and dynamically with just a limited number of texts and hexagrams, what specific detail are due to be missed? So what has people in the past done to fix this issue? Yes, there were people working on this issue. Their approach is as follows. Well, the 64 hexagram generate 4096 so-called scenarios or combination if you use it with the 3-coin method that we described earlier. So hundreds of years ago, a person last name Jiao created a version of I Ching interpretation that encompasses all these 4096 individual scenarios, each assigned with a set of poetic phrases to describe what that scenario is. There are other people later in history that feel 4096 is still just too much to work with. So they simplify the scenario count down to 386. And they also modify the augury methods as well, such as the plum flower method, the coning method. Each sets of the 386 scenario in both of those cases were described again with some sets of poetic phrases. Well, theoretically, one can also expand the I Ching detail by creating not 64 hexagram, but 4096 gram is no longer a hexagram, it's a gram, and using a 6-coin augury method. But there's a lot of effort and work involved, and one who plans to take on such an endeavor better evaluate his risk and reward, see if it is really necessary. Well, from my point of view, some doubter claim that you can interpret the result as anything. Well, is it true? Well, I want you to draw your own conclusion. But my focus is not to defend the ambiguity of I Ching augury reading. My focus is on process improvement so we can minimize ambiguity from the interpretation and make it more useful to us. So my strategy to minimize the interpretation ambiguity will approach from the following angle. Basically, the emphasis is on the structure of our question. So whenever we ask the I Ching augury a question, we specify who is the subject. Usually it's myself or somebody I'm asking, some family member, whoever. But also give it a time frame. So you don't ask a blank question without specifying how long is this. Do you expect the answer to describe? Is this for today, next week, next month, over the next year? Give it a time frame. Otherwise, the answer is again wildly subject to the interpretations. Next is specify, think of the leaders or influential figures that could influence the answer to your question. If it is related to your medical condition, some of the leader or influential figures are your doctors, for example. So why are these necessary? Because many of the I Ching existing texts already contain the word of leaders or influential figures. And furthermore, as we learned earlier, that the 6 lines of the I Ching hex correlate to people of different positions. So sometimes the influences from the higher position or lower position will will affect your outcome. So we better think about who those people are or who those factors are in advance. And lastly, we should assign a righteous endeavor to the question being asked. This is because I Ching itself, the whole I Ching is structured to motivate us to move toward the righteous path and avoid misfortune. But if you intentionally want to march toward the misfortune, your reading may come out contradictory or very confusing. So I always advocate that as long as your action is righteous, and that's how the wisdom will really come in and help us. So let's assign every question we ask with a righteous purpose, and the answer will come out to be more meaningful. The last FAQ on this video is, can I ask the same question twice? This is the question that's raised by many people who has used I Ching Augury already. Well, if you are re-asking the question because you do not like the initial answer, then I would say don't ask it twice. But you can structure a question differently and ask again. For example, you ask, what will happen to me if I go to the party tonight? And you get the answer, let's say you don't quite understand it or don't quite like it, the answer for whatever reason. You can ask another question as, what will happen to me if I don't go to the party tonight? Or you can even reshape the question as, what will happen to my friend Tom if I don't go to the party tonight? And you get the answer from a different perspective. And finally compose that whole picture together. So there are alternatives for asking the question twice. Now, if you're asking the question twice because you just want to test the answer, I want to play with this to see if this is like a computer where I have same input, would it produce the same output? Well, don't bother with I Ching if you don't intend to believe it or use it. There's no value to prove it either way, because as we mentioned in a few slides earlier, the mechanism of I Ching may has to do with how we perceive our reality. So I think before we get that question straightened out, there's no point proving this is right or wrong. Furthermore, when you so-called in this testing mode, your mind may not be asking the same question you are asking on the surface. You may be having an underlying question such as, I just don't believe it, or this must be a divine power. The question may not be what you're exactly asking on the surface. So, of course, I Ching will respond with a different type of answer. One of the ways to avoid the temptation of asking the same question twice is to put a time constraint to your question. And in those if you do put a time constraint, yes, you can ask multiple times. A good example for this is, what if I buy a house and expect to sell it a year from now? How would I come out? Would I feel good and make money, or would I lose money? I'm sure the response for this 1 year time constraint is quite different if you ask the same question for a 10-year time frame, right? So it's very logical. So by asking the same question multiple times, actually you do get a more complete picture of the endeavor or the action you are planning to take on. Lastly, if the answer to your question is subject to humans' free will, which will change over time, yes, you can ask again of the same question a later time and get an updated answer. For example, let's say you're son or daughter has a basketball game, important basketball game 3 months from now. Right now, they are not well prepared. So if you ask the question right now, the response may be different than you ask the same question 1 week before the basketball game, where everybody's all in shape and the teammate clicks and all that, and they are all ready for the ball game. They could have a different result. So in those circumstances, yes, you ask the question multiple times because they are greatly influenced by all the participants and all the so-called free will. Okay, in conclusion of this video, based on my own experiences of applying and teaching others, digesting the original I Ching is still the best way to make I Ching useful in your life. And you can make it useful either through the original inherent wisdom that's residing within the text and hexagram, or through the Augury. For any question or feedback, you can post your questions under this video or send us an email, and I look forward to see you again in our future videos.